Our next speaker, Ben Cate, has worked in a variety of aspects of natural resource management, including wildlife research and habitat improvement projects for Oregon State University and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and is the manager of several wildlife mitigation properties for the Burns Paiute tribe. In his current role, he serves as coordinator for several ecological collaborative initiatives in Harney County, Oregon. Welcome, Ben.
Hello, thank you. Okay, so thanks for the introduction. You might notice that the title of my slide is slightly changed from what was on the program, and that was due to one of my organization's board members basically identifying that not all public land management agencies necessarily manage for sustained yield. He thought that might open us up to some scrutiny, and so I'm still going to touch on that in the conversation, but that is now the title. So my name, Ben Cate, work for the High Desert Partnership, which is located in southeast Oregon in Harney County, and throughout this presentation I'm going to try to include a vision of what the community of Harney County looks like in terms of the available jobs, the economy there, as well as a description of all the ecological collaborative initiatives that my organization works on, and then some guiding principles of some common themes basically that we found through our work to make collaborative initiatives successful, and some lessons learned along the way. So Harney County is the 10th largest county in the United States. It's larger than 6 states, and it encompasses over 10,000 square miles, 75% of which is publicly owned lands. It's home to about 7,300 residents, and the largest community in our area is about 4,500 people, which is 130 miles to the nearest population base, a similar size. So we're extremely geographically isolated. And the primary driver for the private sector economy is ag and ranching. And to give you a picture of what Harney County used to be like compared to now, in 1970, Harney County was home to 10,000 residents and was the highest per capita income in the state, and now is one of the lowest income per capita of the state, mainly due to reduction of logging on Forest Service lands. Harney County is a place that mostly looks like that. We do have some dry pine forests, and it's a place that this is an extremely common occurrence still. This is a state highway just south of Burns and Hines community. Local cattle rancher pushing his cattle down the highway from one pasture to the next. You can drive from the county line to Burns and Hines and never see a car on the road. It's the kind of place that it is. And then this is just a snapshot of the jobs that are available in Harney County. The yellow on the bottom are government jobs, and the blue are private sector work. And the graph in the middle there, the green portion is ag economy. So 32% of the private employment is agriculture, 19% of total employment is agriculture, and this likely underestimates the amount of ag jobs that we have in Harney County because I don't think it incorporates just privately owned businesses that are agriculture. This next pie chart just illustrates the total non-agriculture jobs there is roughly split 50-50 between government employment and private employment. So a lot of government work in Harney County. So now just a little description of collaborative efforts in Harney County. The High Desert Partnership, my organization, is not the only ones doing collaboration. There really is a culture of collaboration in our area to solve complex natural resource issues. Started out in the early 2000s with the Steens Mountain Advisory Council, which was formed sort of to avoid the designation of a national monument in the Steens Mountains. More recently, we've kind of been heralded through the Oregon model to protect sage grouse and the candidate conservation agreements with assurances. There's currently a community-based water planning effort going on in Harney County to address the overallocated groundwater in our basin. All these ones that I just mentioned have a common theme in that they are reactionary to some sort of impending regulation or impending regulation or imminent approaching deadline. And so the High Desert Partnership is taking a more proactive approach to land management in that we've set up numerous collaborative efforts around federal land management that don't have some kind of regulation deadline approaching. And this has allowed us to build the necessary relationships to set our collaboratives up for success. So the first example of that is the first collaborative effort that the High Desert Partnership took on, and it is the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge Comprehensive Conservation Plan. So the Malheur Refuge is 100,000 or 180,000 acres, 150,000 acres of wetlands, and is known as one of the flagship refuges of the refuge system. And it's one of the most important places in North America for migratory waterbirds. And it came out of the recognition from then refuge manager that the refuge would be tasked with updating their management plan in the coming years. And he saw this coming about 5 years out. And that, coupled with the trend of government projects and programs that were not being approved due to litigation, they're being held up in court, along with the fact that there's a history of division and conflict at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge between local ranching communities and agency personnel. He wanted to try a different approach to designing this management plan, and he opted for a collaborative effort through consensus decision making. So he spent about 2 years just building relationships. He teamed up with a local rancher and permittee on the refuge and just started making phone calls, knocking on doors, and basically getting everybody who held an interest in management of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge to the table. And that was a pretty big effort. Included locals, general public, local ranchers, environmental community, scientific, technical experts. And once he got those people all to the table, and they started putting pen to paper, there had been a long history of cattle grazing, of conflict over cattle grazing on the refuge. And when they started building the plan, it became evident that by far the largest contributor to loss or degradation of habitat on the refuge was in fact invasive common carp. It was kind of the elephant in the room that nobody was talking about. And so having that common enemy kind of rallied people together, and they really are addressing common carp on the refuge now. And through this effort, really improved community relationships between refuge staff, local ranchers, and it resulted in a lot more transparency and pretty great consensus around the 15-year management plan of the refuge. So this group continues to meet annually, talking about updates and progress made and discussing their inventory and monitoring plan. So out of the refuge conservation planning effort, a new initiative was formed, and it was the Harney Basin Wetlands Initiative. And this group was formed out of the recognition that carp, migratory birds, do not recognize property boundaries. And if you're truly trying to manage on a landscape scale, those privately owned lands need to be included in the conversation. And so to further their efforts, they sought funding through a large-scale grant opportunity in Oregon through the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And we've received over $6 million in grant funding for research into aquatic health improvement in Malheur Lake and different carp management alternatives, as well as conserving and improving privately owned flood irrigation on neighboring private lands through irrigation infrastructure updates or upgrades, and then research into plant composition through a wet meadow state and transition model. And then there's a large public outreach stakeholder engagement component to that grant as well. So the next collaborative effort that the High Desert Partnership is supporting in Harney County, we call the Harney County Restoration Collaborative. This is our forest collaborative, primarily discussing U.S. Forest Service projects and activities. And so the goal of this collaborative, which I will circle back around to later in the presentation, is basically a healthy forest, resilient to fire, insects, and disease outbreaks with good air and water quality, and that it supports our local economy and that they benefit that from doing work in the forest. One of the largest accomplishments that this group has made over the years is they have achieved over 160,000 acres of NEPA approved for veg treatment with no litigation. And that was sort of the genesis of this collaborative effort, was to get projects approved on the forests that weren't getting held up in the courts. And so just an example of last year's funding that this collaborative effort was able to pull into our region through the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, or CFLRP. And this is the easiest for me to pull up, was just last year's. This has been going on for about 4 years, and this upcoming year is the last year of this funding for now. Could be extended, but. So we were able to pull into our community $4.34 million for project work, which resulted in $1.1 million of appropriated match funds, $2.2 in leveraged investments in infrastructure. And with that funding, we were able to accomplish over 20,000 acres of veg treatments on our local forest, got over 3,000 acres of prescribed fire on the ground, and sold a pretty large volume of timber. We're also able to do invasive plant treatments, decommission a series of roads, and do some stream rehab as well. And then this is just a snapshot of the economic return we're receiving in our communities due to the work that we're able to do in the forest now. So you can see through timber harvest, restoration, mill jobs, and implementation and monitoring work, we've been able to maintain or sustain a total of 237 jobs, which in a small community like ours is pretty impactful. So the next and last collaborative initiative that the High Desert Partnership is supporting, well, Ecological initiative. We have some social and other initiatives that we also work on. Yeah, but this one is a Harney County Wildfire Collaborative, primarily around rangeland ecosystems and primarily land managed by the BLM. It does also incorporate privately owned lands that interface with BLM. This group was established in 2012-13 after a series of extremely large megafires in Harney County burned approximately 1 million acres of sagebrush land. And so the purpose of this group is basically to reduce the potential for and impact of megafires in our area. And the first thing they wanted to address was suppression efforts. So there was a real disconnect between the agency firefighters and the rural fire protection agencies in our area. And so that was sort of the low-hanging fruit. Let's get those people talking to each other, improve communications and relationships between those entities, and now they're working together as they should be. The next thing was early detection. Some of the areas in southeast Oregon are extremely remote, and a fire can burn for days before it's detected and reported. And so we have a series of remote cameras now on some of the high areas in Harney County that will hopefully result in earlier detection of fires before they get out of hand. And the last thing that they're working on is a pilot project in the Pueblo Mountains, southeast Oregon. And they're working to change the fuel structure and composition in a wilderness study area, which has not been done to date, to my knowledge. So with all the ecological initiatives that the High Desert Partnership helps support, you can see that we cover the vast majority of ecotypes in our region and also include and cover the majority of federal land managers in our region. And what we try to do at the High Desert Partnership is intentionally link the social, economic, and ecological ramifications of any project that we take on. And so that, in a nutshell, is how we get at addressing multiple use, sustained yield of resources on our federally managed lands. And basically by specifically targeting a diverse as possible an all-inclusive list of stakeholders and inviting them to voice their opinions to the larger collaborative group with agency personnel in the room. So next on, or move on to the next part of my presentation, which is how to make collaborative partnerships work. You really need to get beyond who's right and who's wrong in a collaborative and reconcile competing or incompatible goals. And everyone really needs to benefit in a true collaboration. And people need to come prepared to agree upon what they can live with. Solving complex issues is not black and white, and we can really accomplish a lot in the gray areas. So this is just a list of some of the guiding principles we've found to help set up a successful collaborative effort. You really need to build the relationships up front, early on in the process. You need to empower the group to make meaningful and impactful decisions. Effective communication is extremely important. We've also learned that the process of how you structure and set up your collaborative effort is vital to its success. And then we see value in a support organization, such as our own, that rallies for, or that assists with process and not the outcome. And then, obviously, you need to follow through with implementation and don't stop once you have a plan approved. So, when talking about building relationships, we often talk about trust. And when I'm talking about trust, we're talking about trusting that people are going to come to the table honest and open with their viewpoints. They're not going to change their mind behind closed doors with someone else. And once you get to that point, when someone isn't at a particular collaborative meeting, you can say, you know, if this person were here in this situation, they would likely react like that. And once you start to be able to see things from another person's perspective, I think that is truly what collaboration is all about. And you really can't come to the table thinking you're going to convince everyone to see things from your perspective. It's not about capitulation, and everybody comes to the table with different life experiences, and that, in a true collaborative, is what its strength is. So we often talk about having 100 cups of coffee in the relationship building phase, having those critical one-on-one conversations, and talking about what people might gain from coming to the table in collaboration. Folks are always more willing to contribute when they understand the benefit they can receive from participating. You must also empower decision making and know that the decision is made by the group, and then agency participation must really make a genuine commitment to empower the collaborative to make decisions. And that commitment needs to be secured early on in the process during the relationship building phase. Another vital thing is that you must have a mechanism to bring credible scientific information to the dialogue, as well as a well-articulated technical statement about the needed conservation objectives. And that will help your collaborative prevent getting bogged down in a scientific debate. I'm going to circle back around to this statement and goal of our forest collaborative. So everybody can just read that bullet point real quickly. So this statement here was wordsmithed by a large group of people, which can be painful. But it's the kind of broad, vague statement that everybody can get behind and support, and it really helps move the conversation from what we want it to look like to how do we get there. And effective communication is vital, and success or failure hinges on this piece. One thing we've learned is that you really need to listen to the communities and fully acknowledge the concerns of the local community who's going to be most impacted by the outcome of the process. Communication needs to clearly identify the purpose, roles, and expectations of the collaborative effort from the start. Any changes in those roles, any changes in political developments that might influence the outcome, as well as just keep participants informed of different subcommittee work. And we've learned that having a plan written out is extremely helpful. Communicating in simple terms is good. Technical and scientific terms are often not the best when trying to communicate to a broad audience. And we've basically learned that there's no such thing as too much effective communication. So process is more important than you can know. two of the major things that we've identified as far as process go that have been vital to the success of our collaboratives are having neutral facilitation and project management. Having a neutral facilitator and an engaged project manager helps foster an environment of trust, mutual respect, as well as to mitigate power differentials or perceived power differentials, say between high-ranking agency staff and general public. We see value in having an entity or an individual or group to play the role of process steward. And that entity's job is to pay attention to the structure of the process, that it's structured for success. And then we've also learned along the way that you don't necessarily need a professional facilitator, but you need someone who understands the issue and cannot take a position on the issue. And then that person shouldn't be afraid to point out counterproductive conversations that can lead you down a path you don't want to go. And we've learned that the process you use to set up your collaborative can shape the majority of group dynamics, but you can't account for everything. You can't predict what people are going to say, and so 10% remains a wild card, and you have to be prepared for the unexpected. So we describe ourselves, the Hydrogen Partnership, as a backbone organization offering support, logistical and process support to our partners, but we don't take a stance on the issues. And the collaborative process for us varies to meet the needs of the individual group, but it always consists of a few key steps, and we can do a lot of different things to help support our partners. We've been the fiscal agent for resources coming into the group. We manage their grants. We've also been the employer for seasonal employees when agency are having a hard time hiring short-term seasonal employees. And we can do a whole lot of things, but what we do not do is conduct projects on our own accord. We don't provide conflict mediation or set a direction or goal for the collaborative groups. That comes from them. So this is just an infographic sort of describing how our organization supports and strengthens the collaborative groups. If you just go from left to right there, we provide facilitation and services. We arrange meeting times and secure meeting locations. We act as a liaison between the funders and our partners. We ensure that the group decisions are acted upon and progress occurs. So we identify action items after every meeting, follow up with partners as to who volunteered to do that work. We also identify key stakeholders and engage them in the process, perform outreach and communications for our partners, and then we help them secure funding through writing grants, seeking funds through foundations, things like that. And all along the way, we're regularly engaging with conversations in the community to make sure that our efforts are aligning with what the local community needs as well. And then obviously, we need to see it through implementation. You can't stop once the plan's finished because implementation problems almost always arise. And you need to be intentional about securing commitment from your partners early on. And then we've learned partners can provide support and defensibility when adaptive management decisions are needed, when you need to change direction. Adaptive management addresses uncertainty, and it's based on the premise that different perceptions of a problem require participatory problem definition and resolution. And basically, that means it eases a decision maker's nerves knowing that there's support from a diverse group of stakeholders. So a lot of things are called collaboration these days. Few probably are not. These are listed things that really aren't collaboration in our mind. Asking a diverse group to review a plan that's already been developed. Holding a series of public meetings and then going and doing whatever you want. Simple problems don't need collaboration. They likely have simple solutions. And partnering to implement projects that have already been planned isn't true collaboration. And it certainly isn't a check-the-box activity to meet grant requirements or organizational mandates. And then making recommendations to decision authorities, not true collaboration in our mind. And so really a lot of what is being called collaboration these days likely isn't true collaborative effort. So a few lessons learned along the way for us. One is a quite unfortunate lesson learned in our community, is that collaboration can be a buffer against extremism. And here I'm speaking about the armed takeover of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in January 2016, when an outside extremist group came into our community and said that the only way that you're going to get your voice heard by federal land management agencies is to take up armed rebellion against the government. That didn't really sit quite right with the majority of active people in the community because we have all these avenues for general public, landowners, environmentalists to come and share their voice, opinions, recommendations to our collaborative partnerships with agency personnel in the room. And so when you add that to the fact that there's 50% of our population that doesn't work on ranches, work for the federal or work for the government, in a community where you know your neighbor really makes it harder to paint the picture of tyrannical criminals, that the government workers are criminals. In an organization where you know your neighbor, you go to church with those people, or your kids go to school with them. And so the Malheur occupation was really destined to fail, and they couldn't have chosen a more wrong community to attempt this in. And they didn't do their research and were likely unaware of all the collaborative efforts already ongoing in Harney County. And they really didn't do the one most important thing in collaboration, which is listen. They didn't hear the concerns of Harney County, which are largely substantive. The issue of getting your voice heard by the federal government land management agencies is being addressed. And the things we're talking about now are how do you utilize small diameter timber from forest restoration projects? How do you get more prescribed fire on the landscape? How do you minimize risk of wildfires in wilderness study areas? Things like that. And had these collaborative efforts not been underway in Harney County for so long, there may have been a little more buy-in from the local community to the Bundy agenda. So a few other lessons learned along the way is that it's easy to get jaded, but you need to come to the table with an open mind and an understanding of what real collaboration is. We've also noticed that our collaborative efforts have helped mitigate staff turnovers for agencies. So after the occupation, the majority of Malheur Refuge biological staff left, and partners really stepped up to the table and helped projects stay on track, moving ahead, and keep that collective institutional knowledge of the location present and help catch new employees up to speed. And then we've learned that you should begin by trying to make smaller agreements before you move on to bigger, more substantial agreements. And so with that, I will just say in summary that collaboration is difficult, and I was here to highlight an organization in the High Desert Partnership that focuses on the process of how to set up a successful collaborative.
Thank you, Ben. We have a few minutes for questions before we break up into a break.
So, do you have a sense of why? So I look at a place like Harney County, and I think, yeah, you've got a long history of dealing with this. To some extent, it was a response to crisis. But then there's other counties, I'm thinking specifically of your neighbors directly to the north, where they've had the same kinds of history, the same kinds of challenges, and yet the response seems to be belligerence rather than collaboration. I'm wondering if you have an idea about how does this collaborative spirit develop in one place and not another? Can we fix it?
Yeah, that is very interesting how two neighboring counties could be so different in the culture of collaboration. I don't necessarily think I have an answer to that, but I think it's been a real testament to the agency staff that is working in Harney County and their genuine commitment to reach out to the people who have issues and invite them specifically to participate in our collaboratives. It could be just the agency staff that is there, and I think that we are making headway with our local ranching community, and I don't know that the effort is the same in our neighboring Grant County. So it was a little bit of both, I would say. There were some folks in the community that were participating that maybe stepped away from our collaborative efforts, but overall it strengthened it. Some of the collaborative meetings just post-occupation were some of our largest groups. We had to rent different meeting spaces because we had so many people flooding in wanting to be a part of it. So it garnered attention, which was helpful. Yeah. Sorry.
Would you say that as a community you all have healed from that?
I'm going to say no. I mean, there are definitely lingering factions in our community. And the thing that really messed it all up and made it more complicated was the Hammond case. So they kind of rallied behind one of our local ranchers who a lot of the community did feel for them and thought that they kind of got the short end of the stick. And a lot of people had a hard time deciphering the difference between the Hammond case and the Bundy agenda, which really was quite different. But the Bundys kind of used that as their in, and so there's still some factions, and we're definitely still dealing with that. Yeah.
For land managers or private landowners that want to be involved in collaborative partnerships like this, is there any kind of a network for organizations like this that exists in the West?
You know, I do not think that there is. To my knowledge, someone else here might know that, but yeah. Oh yeah. So the question was, is there a network that is in place of similar collaboratives like this if you want to know how to get involved? And I'm not aware of one, but
There is CRM, or CRMP, Coordinated Resource Management Planning, which I'm going to talk about a little bit tomorrow.
perfect.
That's Diane.
Okay.
How did highdesertpartnership.org start?
Our specific organization or this website? The organization. It really formed out of the initial Malheur Refuge comprehensive conservation planning effort. And it was sort of a combination of one of our more proactive ranchers there in the area, seeing that the conflict of agency and local ranchers wasn't getting us nowhere. And so one guy, Gary Marshall, who's local neighboring rancher in Harney County, and the refuge manager, they sort of spearheaded this, and then it's grown a lot since that initial effort.
We've got time for one more. So, did you manage to pinpoint a couple of really effective approaches for managing carp? How do you get rid of those suckers?
It's a huge challenge, for sure, especially in a place like Malheur Lake, which is extremely unique and perfect for breeding carp. It's extremely variable. The lake itself, it can be anywhere from 10,000 to 80,000 acres, all of which is about 3 feet deep, which is ideal carp habitat. And yeah, they're working on it. There's someone who's getting his PhD in developing an ecosystem and or carp population dynamics model. And we have some ideas, but nothing real final or no silver bullet at this point. Going to be a lot of piecing it together.